Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles and cousins, of course, and nanas and papas, or grandmothers and grandfathers, depending on your preference, and baseball fans everywhere. Welcome to this edition of the Valley Baseball League podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Graham Knight, and on behalf of the Valley Baseball League and the teams in this league, I want to welcome you to this edition of the Valley Baseball League podcast. You know, over the course of the last, say, 2 months, since around March 12th, depending on whether or not you were in school, or March 16th if you were in work, safe at home has meant get home and stay there and avoid the pandemic. But 10 years ago, safe at home meant something much different to the Newmarket Rebels and to the Valley Baseball League. And it is my pleasure today to introduce you to Austin Gisriel, who wrote the book and followed the Newmarket Rebels around for, what was it, the whole season, right, Austin?
It was actually the whole year because, as you know, most people think, oh, the season's 2 months and that's it. But to run these teams, it's a year-round activity. So I started back actually with the last game of the previous season, the last game of 2008. I wanted to see how these guys, were sent home by their host families and by the organization. And then I would go to league meetings. I was in on an interview for the head coaching position, the Christmas party, you name it, any of the activities that go on before the season actually started, I covered, so to speak. And then when the season started, of course, that's when the fun really began. And stuck with them right through the playoffs and their final day, turning in their uniforms and all the goodbyes.
Yeah, it's funny. So I, a long time ago, was dating a girl who had family in South Philly, and she turned me on to the Mummers Day Parade, which just blew me away. And I asked after the parade, I was like, well, when do they start planning for the next year? Because, I want to be part of it. I want to find out what they do. And they're like, they started tomorrow, the day after the parade, and they work all year long, just programming for that one day. And the same is true for the Valley Baseball League. Hey, Austin, do me a favor. Take me back to, I don't know if it was 2008, 2007. Take me back to the moment you discovered the Valley Baseball League, and then kind of what inspired you to follow them for a year and write Safe at Home.
Sure. There was actually a moment, a particular evening. At that time, we lived in Williamsport, Maryland, which is the first exit off of 81 as soon as you cross into Maryland over the Potomac. And we came down to Newmarket just for a weekend getaway. This was before cell phones. So it was like, we'll leave the mail behind, the phone behind. It was at the end of the school year. And our older daughter was, I think, in 8th grade, 9th grade, something like that, maybe even a little younger. And her sister's 4 years younger than she. And, the hotel had a pool, and we knew Newmarket from different trips through the valley in any case. So this is just a nice little place to get away and, for a weekend, relax.
Right.
We were walking through town that night, and here was this sandwich sign on the corner that said Rebels Baseball tonight. Well, my younger daughter, Becky, she's a baseball fan. She was a daddy's girl. And so we said, well, we got to go. We got to see what this is. I had no idea about college summer baseball or anything else. So we walk into Rebel Park there, and the first guy I see is this little old man. I mean, literally, this little old man, and he's changing his top out of the back of his trunk. And I said, let's go ask this guy. He's obviously been around a while.
Right.
He can tell us what we're going to see here. And as it turned out, that was Mo Weber.
Right.
And so if you knew Mo, you knew that there was not going to be a short answer to my question. So we got a 10-minute report, a scouting report on the Rebels catcher and what to look for. And, of course, the ballpark is beautiful. The people are great, as they are throughout the entire Valley League. And we were just hooked that this game, this league existed here in small town America. And it really was a sense of, and this is what town ball must have been like back in the 30s and 40s. And we were hooked. So this was, I want to say 2003, something like that.
Wow.
2004. And each summer, it seemed like we would come down to more and more games, till it got to the point of once a week. And I took up a writing career. I'd done some freelance writing 20 years before, quite a bit, and came back to it. And in 2008, I did an article on the Valley League for Virginia Living. And of course, I was going to, as a fan of the Rebels, I was going to go to Bruce Alger right away. And of course, as you know, Bruce has such a long history with the Valley League.
Right.
And did this article for Virginia Living. And he and I were talking at Southern Kitchen there. I said, there's a book here. And he said, I've always thought so too. Why don't we do that? So it was that simple. That's how the book got started.
Wow. Hey, so if you don't mind me asking, what was your day job prior to becoming a best-selling author in the Valley Baseball League? And I will talk about your career since then. But what was your day job before then, if you don't mind me asking?
Not at all. I was a high school English teacher in Washington County, Maryland, Hagerstown, the main city town in Washington County. Let's just say I grew a little weary of that career and started a small landscape business. So it's been kind of a Renaissance life. Mm-hmm. And as I said, early in my teaching career, I'd done some writing, a lot of freelance stuff. In fact, the first thing I ever did, I'll tell you this story just real quickly. My wife and I were married in August of 1979. Well, in June of 79, that was the 25th anniversary of the Orioles coming to Baltimore from St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And they had an old-timers game and a 25th anniversary celebration. So my then fiance, Martha, and I went out to this game. And, it was just wonderful. It was inspiring to see all my childhood heroes. And, of course, Brooks Robinson was only retired a couple of years at that point. But I saw all kinds of guys I knew and whose baseball card I had and still have. And I just felt inspired to write about my experience. And so I wrote about it. And I thought, well, I'm going to send this to, at this time, Bill Tanton was the editor of the Evening Sun. There were 2 editions back in those days. Not with the idea of being published. I just wanted somebody else I thought who would understand my feeling to read what I had written. So I sent it in. And by this time, it's early July. And I'm sitting on the porch one night, and I'm looking through the evening paper, and there's my article on the op-ed page of the Evening Sun. And so we got married a couple weeks after that, went on our honeymoon. A couple weeks after that, we're back at my parents' house, and there's a check in the mail for me for $75 for this article. And I'm like, I can do this. So that's what, if they want to pay me for writing about, moving experiences, I will just get into this. And I did, and had a little bit of success locally on a freelance level. And then, marriage, career, getting a family started, running into some frustration as a lot of writers do, that I'm just not getting where I want to be, and kind of set it aside. And then my wife said, you've always done this, and why don't you pick that back up? And so that's the long version of how I got into all of this in a general way.
Wow. Well, so much to talk about. I definitely want to dive into the writing career since you've written Safe at Home, but let's start with Safe at Home. So you and I had a similar experience. You kind of stumble into Newmarket and discover the Rebels. I'd lived in Winchester for about 7-8 years. We moved here in 2009, and it was like 2016. I'd heard about there's some kind of semi-pro team or something in Winchester, and I know they talked about moving like the Hagerstown team down here, or Frederick, or somebody. But I was like, well, where is the stadium? I could never find it. And then I finally stumble into Jim Burnett Park and Bridgeforth Field. And as soon as I see the Winchester Royals and realize what's going on, I'm hooked. I'm in some ways a writer, but more a filmmaker than a writer. And I end up spitting out a 6-part series on just like, oh my gosh, Winchester, did you know this was here? I've lived here for, 7 years, and I didn't know. Why aren't you guys all coming out to this? So it's funny that you and I are kind of had similar experiences. So we had Zach Cole on this show a while ago, and he tried to describe life in Newmarket. For somebody who hasn't been there, how would you explain Newmarket to the average newbie?
That's a very good question. I always found it, first of all, let me say, I always found it very welcoming. You can go to a lot of small towns in different places, and if your great-grandfather's not buried on the hill, you're a stranger. And if you live there 20 years, you'll be a stranger still.
Right.
So Newmarket was very welcoming, and perhaps because of its size, it is the smallest town in the Valley League. the Rebels really are the focus of their summer. Almost everybody, it seems, in town is involved. And so it's very special in that regard. Like, for example, you're talking about Winchester, and we live now in Stevenson, which is just north of Winchester. I run into people in Winchester like, the Royals, what are you talking about? We've never heard of the Royals, and they've lived here, maybe their whole lives. But you don't run into that in Newmarket. Pretty much everybody knows who the Rebels are down there, which makes it a lot of fun. And, you can walk from one end of town to the other, which I certainly enjoy. So I think, and I would also say the values are similar to what you would expect if you could go back in time to the 30s and 40s. You value your neighbor, you value that the people in town, that you're going to do business with the people in town before you would go, if you could, before you would go to Harrisonburg or Winchester. So they're loyal to one another. Right. And it's a little bit different in that way, in a very good way.
Well, so yeah, it is different. It's special. For anybody that hasn't been to the Southern Kitchen, I highly recommend it. I end up during baseball season doing a lot of traveling down 81, and I always try to time it so I can stop in the Southern Kitchen, who, definitely a sponsor of the Newmarket Rebels. But stop there for a meal. It is kind of the quintessential small town cafe, restaurant, whatever you want to call it, diner. But there is something just unique and special. And as a matter of fact, several of the scenes from your book take place in the diner. You end up there on several occasions talking about the games, coaches, etc. Take me back. Like, it's been, if I did my math right, the copyright for Safe at Home was 2010. So you are finishing your first decade worth of storytelling in the Valley, at least. As you think back on that season and that whole year, what highlights stand out?
Oh, it was, a couple. And this is going to sound cliched, but the whole experience really was a highlight. I mean, just one thing after the other. The Christmas party, for example, and Bruce, which takes place, Bruce always holds at Bruce Alger in his home, which if you know Bruce, he lives right next to the ballpark.
Right.
So it's a Christmas party in December. He turns the lights on in the ballpark, and we can sit in his house and look out. And, it was like, it was just the field was just waiting for us. It was just waiting for a spring, and in this case for summer to begin. And just that moment, in that crystal clear winter air, to see that ballpark lit up and what it was going to represent, not just to me as someone who was going to follow the team for the season, but you could tell everybody had that same sense. Another season with the Rebels. It was just so highly anticipated by the people in town. So that was a highlight. But I would say two other highlights were I got to sit in the dugout for a game. And I thought this would be important perspective to add to the book. So I went to the manager, Lucas Jones, and I said, would you mind if I sat in a dugout? And by this time, it was maybe halfway through the season. So they knew me. I'd been on the buses, and I would stand out there and shag balls and talk to guys that way, which I found very conducive way to interview ball players. And they could see that at least at that age, I still could throw it back into the infield and catch without getting hurt. And so there was a little bit of respect. I think that they saw that, I was willing to get out there and sweat with them and play. But I went to Lucas. I asked him if I could be in the dugout. I go to Bruce. Lucas said, sure, that's fine. So I go to Bruce. He said, well, let me check with the league office. And he comes back and he says, that's not a problem, but we'll have to give you a uniform for you to be in the dugout. I'm like, hey, you're never going to get it back. What do you mean? You have to? Like, this is great. Are you kidding? So I sat in the dugout, and about a week later, the guys in the bullpen are coming to me, and they're like, hey, when are you going to spend the night out there with us? So I'm thinking, well, that's another great perspective, So I go to Lucas, like, I already got my uniform, Can I, how about if I spend a night in the bullpen? And he thinks for a minute, and he strokes his chin, and he says, yeah, that's a good idea. I'd like to know what goes on out there during the games. So, I sat out there and got an evening's worth of great stories and great perspective. And, of course, I thought it was very important for me, if I was going to really tell this story, to build a certain camaraderie with the guys. You know, I had to tell it from the inside out, not just as a reporter, so to speak, sitting in the stands, just watching what went on. And my wife, who had been a professional copy editor, she did the proofing of the book, and her first response was, you know, I was worried there was going to be too much baseball in this, but you struck a very nice balance between the human element, what goes on in town, and the baseball part of it, which of course I took as a very high compliment. And I think really the best compliment I get about Safe at Home is you really told the story of the town before anybody says anything about the baseball. And I don't know about your situation, but for a spouse to come through with a high praise like that, now you've really done something, because they're usually the first ones to say, hey, this comma is not in the right place, and I didn't understand this, and so forth, which, you know, that's what we want our loved ones to do, is not spare us the criticism. But that was very pleasing.
Yeah, that is very pleasing. It's nice to hear that you had such good positive feedback from a loved one. My mother was a writer and my dad was a newspaper man, and she never got any love about her writing from him. And I remember many sad nights over that. Hey, listen, we're going to take a short break. We are going to say thank you to a couple of our sponsors, and then we'll be back with our conversation with Austin Gisriel. Well, Safe at Home. We're Safe at Home, talking to Safe at Home author Austin Gisriel. We'll be right back after this. Hey, really hate to interrupt the conversation, but I do need to do a couple things. One, want to encourage you all to please subscribe, like, and share us. That's super important. Our mission this summer is, since we can't bring you baseball, is to share with you the excitement that happens in the Shenandoah Valley. And if you share it with your friends, you'll help us spread the news. We want to let players and families and fans everywhere know what happens here and why it's so important and what makes it so much fun. If you haven't tried it, come out and give it a try. 2021 looks like it's going to be your year to do that. There'll be a lot of pent-up demand by that point, so we encourage you to subscribe, like, and share us, and then come and enjoy it for yourself once we're back on the baseball diamond. Also want to encourage your questions, comments, thoughts, criticisms, whatever, stats. If you got a stat line you want to share it. vbleague@isomermedia.com. That's vbleague@isomermedia.com. Also want to give a shout out to our great sponsor, Grace Burrows. Grace helped us back when we were just a fledgling little live stream endeavor. She stuck with us. This is her third year with us, and we are grateful to her for everything she's helped us be able to do. It's a reciprocal relationship, so Grace helps us because her readers help her. So if you haven't given historic romance a try, definitely encourage you to crack the cover of one of Grace's books. Here, take a look at her most recent endeavor. All right, we've encouraged you to like, subscribe, and share. You know where to write us if you got a question and comment, and I know a little bit more about Grace than you did before. Grace, thank you for everything you do. Now it's time to get back to the conversation. All right. Hey, welcome back, everybody. For those of you just joining in, we are talking to Austin Gisriel, who is the author of Safe at Home. Yes, we're both safe at home right now in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. But we're talking baseball, which is the second best thing to watching it. Anyway, Austin, thanks so much for joining us today. Let's take a minute and talk about Mo Webber. Mo Webber was recently, actually, I'm not exactly sure when he was inducted into the Valley Baseball Hall of Fame. Do you know when Mo was inducted?
I know he was the second class. So whatever year that was, I want to say maybe 2015, 16, something like that.
Yeah, he might have been inducted when the same year that Dayton Moore was inducted. Uh, anyway, talk to me a little bit about Mo. Mo was quite the character. He was with the league for a long time, and he coached players like Brett Gardner and several other players. You talk about him a fair bit in the book. What memories do you have, and what ones still stand out about Mo Weber?
Wow. Well, there's so much that stands out about Mo. His sense of humor was great. I think beyond that, and of course his jokes were all corny and he told them 1,000 times, but the great thing about him was he laughed at each one of those as if he had just heard it the first time himself. So it always made it humorous. And I think it was remarkable, his ability to command the respect of kids who were young enough to be his great-grandchildren, much less grandchildren. He had an ability to just connect with people, whoever, whatever their situation, whatever their age. And of course, his knowledge of hitting was fantastic. And one of the things I did for the book was I thought, well, I should step into the cage with Mo. What's it like to get instruction from the master here? And that was a highlight, not only of the year, I consider that a highlight of my life, having, my goal was to play in the major leagues like a lot of us was. And of course I tell people it was only a lack of talent that kept me from doing that.
Yeah, minor detail.
Exactly. Yes, very minor detail. But I think it's Mo's ability, to connect with people and then to be able to teach and to make that teaching connection with his ball players. And the respect that he commanded, because, they could have looked at this guy and said, what's this old man going to tell me? And yet within the first 15 minutes, somehow, some way, just through being so much himself and so comfortable with himself, he had commanded their respect. And within 30 minutes, he was commanding their affection. And it was just wonderful to be a part of. And I've always felt honored that I would have been able to call Mo my friend. And of course, we kept in touch right up until the end. And a quick story about Mo. This was after he had finished coaching, but he would still go to the games. And I don't even remember. It was a Rebels game. I don't even remember, who they played. And we were watching the game. And so the next day, the phone rings, and I see that it's Mo. I don't get hello, how are you, nothing. The first words out of his mouth are, how in the world can we try to steal third base when there's already 2 outs? It was his way of saying hello. And really, I love you at the same time. I'm glad to be talking to my friend. It was just right into the depth of the game. And I knew something about the game of baseball. I started following it when I was 7 years old. Went to the 66 World Series when I was 9. Paid attention. I read a lot. And I met Mo when I was, how old was I? In 50, let's just say round numbers 50. And he taught me more in 10 years, 12 years than I had learned in all previous 50 years. And it was such a pleasure, selfishly for me, when he quit coaching, to just be able to sit there and we would just talk about what we were seeing, and he'd look over and say, catcher's feet are awfully slow. And it was a joy to be able to speak that language. And really, as you know, baseball is a language unto itself, and you can put two strangers together, never met one another, but if they're both baseball fans, within 5 minutes they get the conversation going, and now they're off and running.
Right. Hey, speaking of baseball fans, I can't quite tell on the small screen here. What's the picture behind you?
Is it this one?
It's the baseball hat. It's on the other side. I can't tell. There are two pictures. One's got, it looks like a baseball player with a hat. It's either that or Andy.
Yes, well, right. I'm looking at my little picture. Right behind me, I guess to my left as you look at the picture, is Brooks Robinson Hall of Fame poster that Crown Gasoline put out, which is autographed to my wife, as a matter of fact.
Oh, nice.
The other one is the silver anniversary poster. So we got that the day we went out to that the silver anniversary game that I referenced in June of '79.
Right. Yeah. Wow. What fun. Well, I tell you what, let's do this. So much to talk about. I'm hoping you'll be back on the podcast many more times. There's so many things to talk about. Let's cover the book. If people are interested and want to read Safe at Home, where can they find it?
You can get the e-version from Amazon, for your Kindle.
Okay.
And I was just looking at this morning because they do not have the soft cover version. Although, of course, it's Amazon. So I see one new one listed. I'm like, I have no idea how they got a hold of that one and some used copies. And then there's one that says collector copy for like $45. And I'm thinking, somebody must have found one I signed somewhere. But to answer your question, if you want a soft cover copy, the best thing to do is just contact me directly. And my contact information is at my website, which is simply www.austingisriel.com. So that's AustinGisriel.com. Just first name and last name. And as I said, I think it's under books. For each book, it gives you instructions on the best way to order. And then if you order right from me, and of course, there's whatever the going postage rate is, but you get a signed dedicated copy. So
Oh, nice. Well, speaking of books, so this was the first. Congratulations on the book, by the way. Talk to us a little bit about your writing career since then. Every time I mention your name or it comes up, everybody's like, "Oh, he's really become quite the writer." I think he's on number 6 now. Before we wrap this up, catch us up on your book list.
Sure. Well, something that especially fans of the Valley League might be interested in is a free download from Amazon. It's only available as an ebook called Their Glorious Summer. And in 1981, back in the days when there were only 8, 12, something like that, of these summer college leagues around, the Rebels had 2 players, John Kruk and Tom Browning. Browning goes on to pitch a perfect game for the Reds. Most people, I think, if you're watching this podcast, you know who John Kruk is. Well, he was drafted by the Padres 3 weeks into the Rebels season. So they needed another left-handed hitting outfielder to go out and get Dan Pasqua, who played for 10 years for the White Sox and the Yankees, and asked Bruce Alger about some of the home runs that Pasqua hit at Rebel Park. Still legendary in Newmarket. But that year, their arch rival was the Winchester Royals, who were only 2 or 3 years old, and it was the summer of the player strike. And, we've talked about how people here now live in Winchester, never heard of the Royals. Well, the Royals, especially with the Major League player strike, they were the big deal in town. And I think of like 28 guys on their roster, 22 were drafted, and played some level of professional ball. So in any case, I won't give the ending away as to how the season all played out. But it was just a great, great story, really, of small town baseball, because there was no big time baseball because of the player strike. So that's Their Glorious Summer. It's available on Amazon. I also wrote a biography of a gentleman named Boots Poffenberger, which is subtitled Hurler Hero Hellraiser. And he was all 3 of those things. He was from Williamsport, Maryland. And just interestingly, real quickly, I got a call from his grandson, who I knew just sort of in passing in town there. And he said, "Hey, I just came into possession of all my father's scrapbooks. Would you like to take a look?" Like, yeah, I'd like to take a look. And I opened his scrapbooks. His Marine Corps dog tags are in there, Social Security cards in there. Clippings that you would never know to look for.
Right.
Anywhere in different newspapers. He made a big splash in 37 with the Tigers, and he went 10-5. He was in the Wheaties commercial, got more money than Bob Feller that year, but he was eccentric, to say the least. Great.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a wonderful character. Even if you don't, if you're so-so and you're interested in baseball, if you just like reading about interesting people, Boots is one of the most interesting guys you'd ever want to meet. I felt that way. He died in 99, but I feel like I met him because so many people in Williamsport, family and friends, bartenders, knew Boots, and they'll talk about him as if he just walked out the door.
Right.
Or usually snuck out the back door and down the alley because his wife was looking for him. But so from there, because Boots served in the Marine Corps, I was getting a lot of information about what life was like during World War II in Williamsport. And that just led to an idea of there's a story here, fictionalized in this case, but sometimes fiction contains greater truth than fact, put
Right.
it that way. And so I wrote a hometown, Homefront trilogy of life in World War II. It starts with 5 young people, opens in June of 1941. We know what's coming, of course, and they don't. And they're kids, like kids of every generation. They're busy showing off and falling in love and wondering what they're going to do. And then they're called upon to save the world, which is a story that certainly reverberates with me. My dad was on a destroyer in the Navy, and my mom worked in a textile factory in Baltimore. And they sewed, before the war, they sewed all kinds of different garments, but then they picked up a contract to make blouses for the Waves, which was the Women's Auxiliary. It was an acronym, but it was essentially the Navy's Women's Auxiliary. And they swore they were going to wait till after the war to get married. And his first leave from the Navy, he came home and they got married. That was Thanksgiving in 1943. So it was
Wow.
those stories really began to resonate with me as I got older. We could do a whole show on that. But in any case, the other book that I would mention is called Father, Sons, and Holy Ghost, Baseball as a Spiritual Experience. And I just got to thinking about, when you meet baseball people, there really is this sort of spiritual aspect to their sense of the game. As I tell people, nobody's ever made a movie about Johnny Unitas' dad coming out of a cornfield and him throwing him a touchdown pass. It's baseball has that hold on people. So why is that? What's the deal with baseball, and how does it grab onto people like that? So it's I used a little bit of my psychology background, a little bit of my theology background, and a lot of just I guess in literary circles you would call it memoir of things that I remember that stuck with me, but tried to explain that from everybody's perspective, but using the details from my life. And I've gotten some nice feedback on that from total strangers who said, "Wow, you followed the Orioles and I followed the Tigers, or I followed the Dodgers, but your experience is the exact same thing as mine."
Right. Yeah, it's something that's shared. Well, Austin, I'll tell you what, let's wrap it up there. And maybe the next time we talk, we'll pick it up with what exactly is it about baseball that does that? Why is it that it's the ghost coming out of the corn for the baseball movie and not the football movie? Listen, I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful for the stories you told about the season with the Newmarket Rebels. Do you want to find out more about Austin Gisriel? It's austingisriel.com. Please read everything he's written. And especially safe at home while you are all safe at home waiting for this pandemic to lift. Thank you for your time. Any last thoughts before we wrap this up, Austin?
Well, Graham, I just appreciate you having me on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we can do it again.
Well, absolutely a pleasure talking to you, Austin.
Likewise.
So much to talk about. Before we wrap this up, we just want to let everybody know that Safe at Home, copywritten 2010. Lots of great players came out of Newmarket. We talked to Zach Cole, who won the championship there, went on to Waynesboro. Sam Perlazzo came out of the Newmarket Rebels, went on to greatness in the major leagues. Austin's mentioned a few names, something magic about that town. Hope you'll get a chance to catch a game in the near future when Valley Baseball League continues. But until then, stay with us. We'll be continuing to bring you more stories from the Valley League. Until then, we wish you all perfect health, and we wish you all a quick and speedy return to the baseball diamond. For the Valley Baseball League and all the teams in the league, I'm Graham Knight. Thanks for watching us. Have a good night.